I humiliated my boyfriend, called him the woman in our relationship in front of my friends, and said he was broke after I got a promotion. Now my entitled boyfriend abandoned me and left me with the bills he usually used to pay, and now I'm broke. I'm 26, recently single, and waking up to screenshots people keep sending me of things he's saying, or not saying, about why he left. And I guess I need to explain something because the story going around right now is that I'm this awful person who drove him away and then acted shocked when he left. But what actually happened is that my boyfriend of 2 years just disappeared from our relationship like someone unplugging a lamp. And now everyone keeps using the word blindsided like it's dramatic or something. But I mean, yeah, that's exactly what it felt like. I keep replaying the last night in my head because people are acting like it must have been this huge fight that pushed him over the edge, and I honestly wish there had been. A fight at least makes sense. A fight means something built up and exploded. This was just a party. It wasn't even our party. It was my friend Lauren's birthday thing at her apartment. Half the people there were coworkers from my office, and a few people from my college friend group who all sort of merged together over the past year. And before anyone decides what kind of person I am, you need to understand the vibe of my friend group. We tease each other. Constantly. Like if you sit quietly in a room with us, you're going to think we hate each other, but that's just how we talk. Lauren calls me corporate witch because I work in marketing and apparently I sell lies for money. Tyler gets called landlord junior because his parents bought him his condo. Everyone has something. It's not mean, it's just normal. So yeah, I joke about my boyfriend sometimes. I don't even say his name when I tell these stories anymore because it feels weird now, but he's an engineer and he's very calm, quiet. He thinks before he talks, which is honestly a good trait in a partner if you ask me. I'm the opposite. My brain runs fast and my mouth usually runs slightly faster, which he always knew. When we started dating, he actually said that was one of the things he liked about me, that I fill the room. That's how he phrased it. Like I'm this big personality that brings energy places. So the idea that suddenly my personality is the problem feels a little revisionist to me. Anyway, at Lauren's party, people were talking about rent and how expensive everything is getting in the city right now. Someone mentioned moving in with roommates again even though we're all pushing 30 soon. And Lauren looked at me and said something like, "You're fine though, you've got your engineer boyfriend paying the bills." And I laughed because that's obviously not how it works. Yes, he covered more rent sometimes because his salary was higher and he insisted on splitting things proportionally. He actually explained the math to me once with a spreadsheet. That's the kind of person he is. I teased him about it constantly because it was kind of adorable. Like I'd say things such as, if civilization collapses, I'm keeping him around to calculate the food rations. He would smile that small smile he does and shake his head. That's the dynamic we had. Or, I thought we did. So at the party when someone joked about money, I rolled my eyes and said something like, "Please, he's the broke one compared to me now." Which, for context, is technically true at the moment. My company had just promoted me 2 months earlier, and my salary jumped a lot. I was proud of that. I worked my arse off for it. But the way people are repeating the story now makes it sound like I stood on a table and announced he was poor or something. It was literally one sentence. Everyone laughed. The way people laugh when someone says something mildly spicy but obviously playful. I looked over at him after, and he had that same little half smile he always gets when my friends start joking around. So if anyone wants to explain how I was supposed to know that sentence would apparently end our entire relationship, I'm all ears. Because from where I was standing, it looked exactly like every other night we'd spent with my friends. Which is apparently the bigger issue people keep bringing up. They laughed at him. They made him the joke. That's the narrative I'm hearing now. But here's the part nobody seems interested in acknowledging. He was the one who insisted on coming to these things. If I went out with coworkers and he stayed home cooking or gaming or whatever, he'd text asking when I'd be back and whether he should come meet us. He liked being included. He told me that. So when people act like I dragged him into hostile environments, it honestly feels a little unfair. And yes, sometimes I call them soft. That word keeps coming up like it's some kind of slur. But the context matters. He is soft, he's gentle, patient, conflict avoidant. If someone cuts him off in traffic, he doesn't honk. He apologizes under his breath like maybe he did something wrong. My friends are loud, argumentative people. They debate everything from politics to which fast food place has the best fries. So yeah, sometimes I'd say something like, "Don't worry, he's too soft to fight you." It wasn't an insult, it was practically a compliment. In my mind, softness meant he was stable, reliable. not one of those guys who punches walls when they're mad. Which, considering some of the relationships my friends have been in, should count for something. The woman in the relationship joke is another thing people are suddenly acting horrified about. And I'm sorry, but that one especially feels blown out of proportion. Because yes, he cooks more than I do, he likes cooking, like genuinely enjoys it, watches recipe videos while eating dinner he just made. I work long hours and sometimes get home mentally fried, so he'd already have something going on the stove. I used to tell people I hit the jackpot. A man who cooks and cleans remembers to buy toilet paper before it runs out. If I jokingly called him the wife, it was basically me bragging. That's how it felt to me. What people don't seem to mention when they retell these moments is that he rarely argued back. And I don't mean that sarcastically, I mean literally. If I said something teasing, he'd just shrug or smile or change the subject. And when someone doesn't push back, you assume they're fine. Right, like if someone tells you, hey, that actually bothers me, you stop. But silence reads as consent. At least that's how I understood it. He did say something once, though. I should probably admit that. It was early in the relationship, maybe 6 months in. We had just gotten home from drinks with my friends, and he asked if I could maybe not make certain jokes about him in front of people. He said he knew they were meant to be funny, but they made him feel small. That was the word he used, and I remember being surprised because to me the joke had been extremely mild. I think I told him he was being sensitive, not aggressively, just casually. Like, babe, they know I'm kidding. He dropped it pretty quickly after that, which, again, read to me as the issue being resolved. Because in relationships sometimes people bring up something minor, you talk about it, and then you move on. I didn't keep a running list of jokes to avoid after that. Maybe I should have, I don't know. But at the time, it didn't feel like some deep wound he was carrying around. If anything, the thing he seemed proudest of was how calm he was compared to my chaos. He used to say I'd come home from work ranting about clients and coworkers, and he'd just sit there listening while chopping vegetables. I joked once that he was my unpaid therapist. He said he didn't mind. Those are the parts I keep thinking about now. Because if someone spends 2 years acting basically content, cooking dinner, planning weekend hikes, reminding you to take your vitamins, it's hard to imagine they're secretly building up resentment like some kind of pressure cooker. But apparently that's what people think happened. Because the night of Lauren's party, he didn't argue. He didn't pull me aside. He didn't even look particularly upset. He just said he was going to head home early, which also wasn't unusual. He does that sometimes when social things get loud. So I stayed another hour or two, had cake, helped clean up, and then came back to our apartment expecting him to be in the kitchen or on the couch. But he wasn't there. And the weird thing is, his shoes were gone, and his laptop bag, and the drawer where he keeps his clothes was half empty. I stood there for a solid minute trying to understand what I was looking at. Then I texted him asking where he went. No response. Another message asking if he was okay. Still nothing. By the next morning I realized he hadn't just gone for a walk or stayed with a friend, he had left. Like, actually left. Which is why when people say I'm playing the victim, it frustrates me a little. Because from my perspective, the person I lived with for 2 years packed up part of his life overnight without a real conversation. And now he's apparently telling people he tried to talk for years. Maybe he did. Maybe I didn't hear it the way he meant it. But that still doesn't change the fact that when someone disappears like that, it feels less like a breakup and more like being quietly erased from a story you thought you were part of. Anyway, now there are screenshots floating around of my Instagram posts where I said he blindsided me, which he did. And some of his friends have apparently decided that means I'm rewriting history. Meanwhile, my own friends keep telling me the same thing, that if he were that unhappy, he should have acted like an adult and said something instead of vanishing. Lauren literally said, "You can't solve a problem someone refuses to say out loud." And maybe that's the part that keeps sticking with me. Because if all those jokes really hurt him the way people claim, why didn't he push back harder? Why didn't he say, "Stop, this matters"? Why did he just smile and keep chopping vegetables? I don't know. Maybe he thought I wouldn't listen, which honestly hurts more than the idea that I made a bad joke at a party. Because if someone spends 2 years believing you won't take them seriously, that means they stopped seeing you as safe a long time before they walked out the door, and I wish I'd known that earlier. Even if I probably would have said he was being sensitive at first. I still think about that night sometimes. The moment everyone laughed at the rent comment, and he just stood there with that quiet half smile. At the time it looked exactly like every other moment we'd shared with my friends. Now people are telling me that was probably the moment he decided he was done. Which is strange to think about, because if that's true, the breakup technically happened in a room full of people, and I was the only one in it who didn't realize. Boyfriend's response: I'm the guy she's talking about. The engineer boyfriend. The one who ghosted after 2 years and apparently vanished from a perfectly happy relationship because I couldn't handle one joke at a party. I didn't plan on writing anything about it. Honestly, my plan was to leave quietly and let it fade out. Move apartments, keep my head down at work, rebuild my routine, and just not participate in the story she's telling online. But people keep sending me screenshots. Coworkers, mutual friends. One of my cousins texted me a link yesterday asking if I was okay. So at some point, silence starts looking like agreement. And I'm not interested in fighting with her or dragging her publicly. That's not really my personality. Anyone who knows me knows that. But there are a few things missing from her version that make it sound like I woke up one day, packed a bag, and ran away from a harmless sense of humor. That's not what happened. And I think the easiest way to explain it is to start with something she said in her post. She said I'm soft. She's said that a lot over the past couple years, actually. Sometimes as a joke, sometimes not really. The thing is, she's not wrong in the way she means it. I'm not a loud person. I don't compete for attention in a room. I don't like confrontation, and I don't enjoy arguing for the sake of it. My job is engineering. I spend most of my day solving problems that respond better to patience than noise. You look at systems, you test assumptions, you adjust things quietly until the numbers make sense. That's the environment my brain is used to. So when someone raises their voice or starts throwing sarcasm around, my instinct isn't to escalate. My instinct is usually to step back and try to keep things calm. That doesn't mean I don't notice things. It just means I don't perform my reactions the way some people expect. When we first started dating, her personality actually felt refreshing. She's quick, confident, and always has something to say. If a conversation stalls, she'll restart it. If a group gets quiet, she fills the gap. She once told me I make rooms feel calmer. I told her she makes rooms feel alive. That combination seemed to work, at least at the beginning. The teasing started early too, but it really did feel playful at first. She'd introduce me to friends as my extremely responsible boyfriend who probably filed his taxes in high school. Stuff like that. I'd shrug, smile, and keep talking. It didn't bother me because it wasn't mean-spirited yet. It felt like normal social joking. The shift was gradual. It's actually hard to explain because nothing dramatic happened. No single moment where the tone flipped. It was more like a dial slowly turning. The joke started landing a little sharper. Comments about me being domesticated. Things about me, cooking, cleaning, organizing bills. Once during a dinner with her friends, she said something like, "He's basically the wife in this relationship but with spreadsheets." Everyone laughed. I laughed too because that's what you do when 10 people are looking at you. But later that night I mentioned quietly that the masculinity jokes bothered me a bit. She waved it off pretty quickly, said her friends knew she was joking, told me I was overthinking it. That conversation lasted maybe 2 minutes. And here's something important she didn't include in her post. It wasn't the only time we had that conversation, not even close. I brought it up again a few months later after another dinner with her coworkers where she described me as harmless because I'd never confront anyone. Another time after a barbecue when someone asked what I did for work, she jumped in first to say, "He builds bridges, but emotionally he's made of marshmallows." I remember that one pretty clearly because the guy she said it to looked uncomfortable. He didn't laugh. He just looked at me like he wasn't sure whether I was supposed to defend myself. But that's the thing about relationships like this. You don't want to escalate something small in front of other people, so you wait until later, and later, it usually goes the same way. You say something like, "Hey, that joke didn't feel great," and the response is usually some variation of, "You're sensitive, it's just humor," or "Everyone jokes like that." Eventually, you start measuring whether the conversation will accomplish anything. Most of the time, it didn't. So yes, after a while I stopped bringing it up. Not because I suddenly decided it didn't matter, because the cost of the conversation was always higher than the result. It would turn into a debate about whether my feelings were logical instead of a discussion about whether the behavior could change. And that's exhausting, especially when the pattern repeats. I think what she genuinely doesn't understand is that silence isn't the same thing as approval. Sometimes silence is just fatigue. Another piece missing from her version is how much of our daily life was structured around my stability. I don't say that resentfully. It was a choice I made. But the financial situation she joked about at the party deserves a little more context. When we moved in together, my income was higher. That's true. She was earlier in her career, so we agreed to split rent proportionally. What that meant in practice was, I paid the majority of rent, utilities, groceries, and a lot of the incidental stuff that pops up during the month. I didn't mind that. I actually suggested it. What bothered me was when that arrangement became punchlines in front of other people. There were multiple occasions where she'd make jokes about me being cheap or broke or financially cautious, which is strange when you're the person covering most of the household expenses. I didn't point that out publicly because it would have embarrassed her, but privately, it did bother me. I mentioned it more than once. Again, not aggressively, just matter of fact. And again, the response was usually that I needed thicker skin. So over time, something subtle happened inside me. I started participating less, not dramatically, just small adjustments. If her friends invited us out, sometimes I'd say I had work to finish. If a conversation turned towards jokes about me, I'd step away to refill a drink or check my phone. I didn't announce these decisions, I just adjusted my presence. Which probably made it easier for everyone to keep the same dynamic going. The night of the party wasn't actually unique because of the joke. It was unique because I finally realized something while everyone was laughing. The rent comment itself wasn't even the worst one she'd made, but something about hearing it. After I'd paid that month's rent, after I'd spent the afternoon fixing the sink in Lauren's apartment because she asked me to, made a very simple thought land clearly in my head. If I stay here another year, nothing about this dynamic is going to change. Not because she's evil or malicious, because she genuinely believes this is normal. And I had to ask myself a question I should have asked earlier. Do I want to spend the rest of my life explaining why respect matters in small moments? Or do I want to build a life with someone who already understands that? That realization didn't make me angry. It actually made me very calm, which is probably why she didn't notice anything different that night. I went home early because I wanted to think without noise around me. When I got back to the apartment, I sat on the couch for maybe an hour just going through the last 2 years in my head. And the more I thought about it, the more one pattern kept repeating. Every time I'd tried to talk about something important, the conversation had been reframed as me being sensitive. Every time a boundary was tested, the burden was on me to prove it was serious enough to matter. After a while, you stop trying to prove things. You start asking whether the environment itself is right for you. Packing that night wasn't impulsive the way it probably looked from the outside. I'd actually thought about leaving a few times over the past 6 months, not dramatically. Just quiet thoughts like, if this keeps happening, maybe this relationship isn't healthy for me. That night, I realized I'd already made the decision internally weeks earlier. The party just showed me the pattern wasn't going to shift. So I packed some essentials and stayed with a coworker temporarily. I didn't send a message explaining everything because I'd already explained most of it over the past 2 years. Rewriting the same explanation one more time felt pointless. Maybe that was the wrong choice. Maybe I should have written a detailed breakup letter. But at that moment, the only thing I wanted was distance. And honestly, the most surprising part of all of this has been watching the story that formed afterwards. The version where I never spoke up. The version where I silently endured everything and then disappeared over one harmless joke. That version is tidy. Reality was messier. I spoke up multiple times. I tried to keep things calm and constructive. Eventually, I just ran out of energy to keep negotiating the same basic respect. If people want to call that ghosting, I guess they can, but I was leaving a situation that had stopped feeling like a partnership a long time before I packed my bag, and I'm not writing this to attack her. She probably genuinely believes the story she told. But relationships are complicated systems. Update from girlfriend. I read his post. Obviously, I read it. Half the city could have read it at this point because apparently disappearing in the middle of the night like a frightened little boy is one thing, but then coming back later with this calm, tidy, measured explanation where I'm basically some cartoon beach who laughed him out of a relationship is supposed to be the mature version. No, absolutely not. If he had even a fraction of the backbone he keeps implying I punished out of him, he could have said any of that to my face. Literally, any of it. Not in some little public statement where he gets to sound wounded and thoughtful, and above it all, I lived with him. I shared a home with him. If he wanted to break up, then break up. Use your actual mouth. Stand in front of me and say it. Don't pack a bag, sneak out, ignore me, and then later act like you conducted some noble withdrawal because the emotional climate was too hostile for your extremely delicate nervous system. And let me say this clearly, because people keep acting like his version is automatically true just because he writes like someone filing a complaint with HR. I do not agree with his story. not the tone of it, not the sequence, not the whole. I was trying so hard for years and she just kept dismissing me. Martyr thing. I don't agree with the implication that I was out here slowly emotionally battering a saintly man who only wanted respect and quiet. He is not some tragic domestic figure who got chased out by sarcasm. He ran away. That is what happened. He can dress it up with all the systems fail gradually, engineering language he wants, but that's still what it was. He left like a child, avoiding a hard conversation, no final argument. No actual breakup, no sitting down and saying, "This is over, here's why. Let's separate things like adults." He vanished out of our apartment over one night and let me find half his stuff gone, like I was supposed to piece together the ending from visual clues. That is not maturity. That is not calm. That is cowardice wearing glasses. And since he's so concerned with context now, let's do context. He keeps bringing up money like people are crazy for noticing it, as if I invented a financial lie for sport. What he carefully leaves out is that yes, he covered more at certain points, and then my income changed. I got promoted. I worked for that. I earned that. And after I started making more, the energy changed in this relationship whether he admits it or not. He says my comment at that party was about humiliating him while he paid rent. First of all, I was not standing there reading off a monthly expense spreadsheet to a room of people. It was one line, one joke. And second, by the time I made more money, I was also paying for plenty that he is now acting like floated in from the sky with no human hand involved. I covered dinners, drinks, gifts, random group expenses, birthday bookings, rides, and weekends away. The social part of our life he absolutely benefited from while pretending now that he was some put-upon provider chained to a woman with expensive tastes. And since everyone suddenly cares about what bills exist after a breakup, let me tell you what's actually happening while he's writing little moral essays. There are building bills, there are lease issues, there are utility transfers. There is furniture we bought together, subscriptions attached to cards, grocery costs, deposit questions, and 1,000 unglamorous little things that do not disappear because one person decides he's had enough of being misunderstood and wants to go perform suffering online. I have had to deal with all of that while also getting texts from people asking me if I feel bad now after reading his side. Feel bad about what exactly? Being left holding the practical mess while he gets to be emotionally elegant from somewhere else. I need money right now, actually. Not in some dramatic, helpless way. In a real adult way. Rent does not care whose post sounded more sincere. The building still wants what it wants. The bills still show up. Things still have to be paid while he's off reclaiming his peace and letting me look insane for wanting answers. So yes, I have talked about the financial side because it is real. It is not me trying to squeeze him or manipulate sympathy. It's called living in the real world after somebody abruptly bails. And I'm already hearing the wild accusations because once people decide you're that girlfriend, everything gets exaggerated into abuse with a ring light on it. Suddenly, I used him, I emasculated him, I bullied him in public for years. I took his money and mocked him. People are getting very creative now that they've got his sad little narrative to work with. It would almost be impressive if it wasn't my actual life being turned into this crowd project where everyone gets to diagnose me from 6 party anecdotes and an engineer's breakup memo. Did I joke too much sometimes? Maybe. Fine. I can say that without adopting his whole fantasy version where he spent 2 years bravely requesting humane treatment and I stomped on his soul every night before dinner. But what I'm not going to do is sit here and agree that I abused him because I had a sharper mouth than he liked and a friend group that jokes hard. That is absurd. Genuinely absurd. He keeps acting like every social setting was some arena where I fed him to people. Meanwhile, he came to everything. Over and over. He wanted in on my life, my circle, my people, the dinners, the birthdays, the weekends, the energy. You do not get to participate in that world for 2 years and then, after leaving, act like you were dragged through public humiliation against your will the entire time. And yes, now I want a direct conversation. I do, completely. I am saying that plainly so nobody can twist it. If he has the balls to write about me in public, then he has the balls to sit down with me in private and say all of it to my face. Every single accusation, every pattern, every alleged dismissal, every little story he now remembers with perfect emotional clarity. Say it in a room with me there. Because it is very easy to sound devastatingly reasonable when the other person is reduced to quotes and traits and you get uninterrupted paragraphs to yourself. I'm not interested in this weird off-site relationship we apparently have now where he posts, people screenshot, and I'm supposed to just absorb it. No. Come talk to me. You wanted respect. Then show enough to end something directly instead of fleeing and then acting scandalized that I called it what it looked like. And another thing he definitely left out is what happened after I stopped spending so much on everybody. That part is very convenient, because for a while there, after the promotion, I was picking things up more often than I should have. Group dinners, ride shares, covering around, booking the nicer place for someone's birthday, bringing stuff over, and smoothing things financially because I could, and because honestly I liked being the capable one. I liked not having to count every little thing. That's true. Then after this breakup mess started and I suddenly had to deal with bills, leftover shared costs, and actual uncertainty, I cut back. Obviously I cut back. I'm not financing everyone's social life while my own apartment situation is on fire. And wow, what a fascinating social experiment that turned out to be. Because the same friend group that was so loud about loyalty and healing and girlhood and me deserving support got real weird once I wasn't casually throwing money around anymore. Nothing dramatic at first, just the tiny shifts. Plans I heard about later. Group tabs are split more carefully than before when nobody cared. Jokes with an edge to them about me being less generous these days. Lauren is doing that fake light tone she uses when she wants to pretend something isn't pointed. A couple people were suddenly too busy to help me move things or come by when I was clearly unraveling. So now I'm supposed to believe this is all about my character being exposed. Please. Some of these people liked me a lot more when I was useful, fun, and paying for appetizers. And I can already hear the reaction to that too. That I'm lashing out, that I'm bitter, that I'm blaming others because I can't self-reflect. Fine. Maybe I am bitter. Something pretty bitter happens to you when your boyfriend disappears. Tells the world you were basically his long-term emotional oppressor, and then the social circle you spent money and energy on starts moving on in this detached, cleansing little way, like you're a lesson they all learned together. Moving on from what, exactly? From me not subsidizing your nights out anymore. From me being the easiest villain in the room because the quiet man finally wrote a statement. From the discomfort of admitting maybe all of you laughed because it was funny then, and now suddenly it's abuse because he gave it cleaner language. That's what's making me insane, honestly, the retroactive morality. At the time, everybody laughed. At the time, everybody understood the dynamic. At the time, nobody pulled me aside and said, "Hey, I actually think you're crossing a line." Not really, not in any meaningful way. But now that he has rebranded himself as the wounded adult in the room, everyone gets to pretend they were privately concerned all along. Sure, convenient, very noble, incredible timing. And yes, I did go on dates, since apparently that's another thing floating around now too. Not because I was healed, not because I was gleefully moving on, because I was furious and embarrassed and lonely and trying not to sit in my apartment staring at the half-empty spaces where his things used to be. I told people what happened the way I experienced it. That he couldn't handle me. That he shut down. That he left instead of dealing with conflict. And I still think that's true. If those stories got back to him or his orbit, good. Maybe he should hear how it looks from this side instead of acting like only his interpretation counts as fact. As for the apology thing, that's another joke. People keep saying I should have apologized more sincerely, more cleanly, more humbly, like we're in some relationship court and I missed the exact wording required for mercy. I did reach out, I did. Maybe it wasn't the kind of apology his new fan club wanted framed and mounted, but I reached out. And yes, part of that message was me still defending myself because I am not going to confess to being a monster just to make him feel morally complete about leaving me. That seems to be what a lot of people want, actually. They want me broken down and enlightened. They want me saying, wow, I see it all now. I was cruel, he was right. Thank you for exposing my flaws in long-form public prose. Sorry, no, that isn't happening. Because the more this unfolds, the less sorry I feel and the angrier I get. Not because I think I am perfect, I wasn't. I know I can be sharp. I know I push. I know I talk too fast when I'm defensive, and I can make a joke one beat too far. Fine, real flaws, human flaws. But this version of me he's built, where I'm basically the reason he had to sneak out like a domestic refugee from sarcasm, is insulting. It is insulting to me, and honestly, it is insulting to actual bad relationships. He wants credit for all the times he tried. I want him to answer for the fact that at the end of the day, when it counted, he ran. He left me with the bills, the lease, the questions, the social fallout, and the practical cleanup, and then acted shocked that I called it abandonment because apparently the accepted terminology is quiet boundary enforcement now. No. He ran because it was easier than staying and having one ugly, honest adult conversation. He ran because disappearing let him keep clean hands. He ran because if he had to look me in the eye and say, "I'm leaving," then he'd also have to hear me answer back, and maybe he didn't want that. Maybe he didn't want the mess. Maybe he wanted a version where he gets to be the calm one and I get to be the cautionary tale. So here it is from me, since everybody wants clarity. I do not regret defending myself. I do not regret saying he acted like a baby because that is exactly what sneaking out was. I do not regret telling people he could not handle me because clearly he couldn't. And I sure as hell do not regret refusing to kneel down in public and validate every accusation people have decided fits neatly onto my face. What I regret is wasting 2 years on a man who needed witnesses to say things he never had the courage to finish in my kitchen. What I regret is confusing passivity for decency. What I regret is thinking quiet meant depth, thinking restraint meant strength, thinking all that calm meant there was an actual adult man underneath it who would stay in the room when something got hard. There wasn't. There was just someone waiting to leave and make me carry the ugliness for both of us. And I hope he enjoys the version of himself he built out of my rage, because that is the only useful thing he has managed to make from this relationship in a very long time. Analysis. One of the more interesting things about this situation isn't the breakup itself. Breakups like this happen constantly. One person leaves quietly after a long buildup of frustration, the other feels blindsided and reacts publicly. What's more revealing is the way both people interpret the same relationship through completely different psychological lenses. The boyfriend's explanation centers around accumulation. In his mind, the relationship ended because of a long series of small events that eventually formed a pattern. None of the individual moments were catastrophic, but together they created a sense that the dynamic wouldn't improve. People who think this way often leave relationships quietly because, by the time they exit, they've already had the internal conversation many times. The girlfriend's perspective works differently. Her version focuses on the absence of a final confrontation. Without that explicit moment, the big argument, the direct ultimatum, the breakup feels irrational to her. From that standpoint, leaving looks like avoidance rather than a decision that developed gradually. This mismatch highlights a common relationship tension. Some people process problems internally until they reach a conclusion, while others expect problems to be resolved through active confrontation. When those styles collide, both sides end up feeling misunderstood. One believes they tried repeatedly and were ignored. The other believes there was never a serious conversation. Another element worth paying attention to is humor. Humor can function as social bonding, but it can also operate as a subtle form of status negotiation within groups. Teasing, especially in friend circles, often walks a fine line between affectionate and diminishing. What matters isn't only the intention of the joke, but also the environment surrounding it. If the same person consistently becomes the punchline, even playful humor can start to feel like a role rather than a moment. However, humor can be difficult to address directly because objecting to a joke often carries social risk. A person who pushes back may be labeled overly sensitive or humorless. As a result, many people simply endure it until the cumulative effect becomes too heavy. That's why seemingly minor jokes can sometimes become symbolic flashpoints later. The role of the friend group is also significant. Friend groups rarely behave like neutral observers during relationship conflicts. Instead, they respond to shifting social dynamics. At first, people may support whoever appears most distressed or vocal. Later, as more information emerges or the emotional intensity fades, the group may quietly adjust its stance. What complicates matters further is that social groups often rely on informal economies of effort, attention, and sometimes money. When someone regularly contributes, organizing gatherings, paying for things, maintaining the group's energy, their role becomes intertwined with the group's functioning. When that contribution stops, the shift can subtly alter relationships within the circle. This doesn't necessarily mean the group is malicious, it simply reflects how social systems stabilize themselves. Groups tend to avoid prolonged conflict, so over time they drift towards whatever arrangement feels least disruptive. The financial dimension in the breakup adds another layer. Money in relationships is rarely just about numbers. It carries symbolic meaning related to independence, contribution, and fairness. Even when partners agree on how to divide expenses, perceptions of who is supporting whom can evolve as circumstances change. Promotions, salary differences, and lifestyle habits can all reshape how each person views their role in the partnership. In this case, financial contributions appear to have become part of the emotional narrative after the relationship ended. What one partner saw as practical support, the other may have seen as shared participation in building a life together. Once the relationship collapses, those interpretations can quickly diverge. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the situation is how quickly the conflict moved into a public arena. When private disagreements become public discussions, they often transform into simplified versions of themselves. Complex relational dynamics get reduced to recognizable archetypes: the hurt partner, the insensitive partner, the person who stayed too long, and the person who left too abruptly. The problem with those simplified roles is that they rarely capture the full truth of a relationship. Long-term partnerships are usually shaped by many small interactions rather than one defining moment. When the ending finally arrives, it can look sudden from the outside even though it develops slowly beneath the surface. In situations like this, the public conversation often becomes less about the relationship itself and more about how different personalities interpret conflict, communication, and respect. That difference in interpretation may be the most revealing part of the entire story.